In the forgotten fields of Red Willow, where broken dreams were left to gather dust, a little girl dared to raise her hand at an auction nobody cared to watch. Her name was Savannah Hartley. Her heart was too wild for fear, too stubborn for sorrow. And the ghost of a battered gray Mustang, named Ash, would soon teach her and the entire town that sometimes the most shattered souls hold the greatest miracles. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The morning sun struggled to break through the thick veil of mist that hung over the town of Red Willow, Colorado. This small, stubborn town sat nestled among miles of open plains and low hills, where the wind whispered tales of old cattle drives and forgotten dreams. The weather was crisp, almost biting, the kind that stung the cheeks and made breath visible in soft, smoky clouds. Autumn had begun to creep into the valley, painting the edges of the fields with a dull, rusted gold. Savannah Hartley tugged her flannel jacket closer around her slender frame as she stood at the fairgrounds, her boots scuffing the frost-crusted earth. At 13 years old, Savannah was wiry and sharp-eyed, with a tangle of chestnut hair often escaping from her messy braid. Her face bore the early signs of a life spent outdoors, sun-kissed freckles across her nose and a stubborn set to her jaw. Though young, she carried herself with a seriousness that made her seem older, a weight born from losing her father, Mason Hartley, 2 years prior. Mason had been Red Willow's famed horse whisperer, a man who could calm the wildest Mustang with nothing more than a soft word and a slow, steady hand. His death, from a fall while rescuing a trapped foal during a storm, had left Savannah with a hollow ache she couldn't name and a fierce loyalty to the creatures he had loved. Near the livestock pens, Eleanor Hartley waited with a wary patience, arms crossed tightly against the chill. Eleanor, Savannah's mother, was a woman of brisk movements and practical ways. In her mid-30s, she stood tall and lean, her blonde hair always neatly pinned into a bun, her nurse's uniform swapped today for a simple denim jacket and dark jeans. Life had carved careful lines into Eleanor's face, not just from age, but from the strain of raising a daughter alone while juggling work at Red Willow's veterinary clinic. Once full of laughter and a quiet grace, grief had hardened her into someone quick to snap and slow to trust. Though underneath, the same tender heart remained, buried like a treasure under layers of duty. Savannah's breath puffed out as she watched the auctioneer, a stocky man named Bert Landry, shuffle papers and shout bids with a voice like gravel. Bert was a fixture of Red Willow, a sunburned, broad-shouldered man who had run auctions here for 20 years, always wearing the same battered leather hat and a scuffed pair of cowboy boots that had likely seen better decades. Bert didn't bother hiding his disdain today. The horses being sold were leftovers from the now defunct Clearwater Therapy Ranch, most deemed too broken, too timid, or too wild to be of use. For him, this was just another transaction. The horses shifted nervously in the chilly morning light, their coats dulled, ribs showing under skin too tight for comfort. Buyers roamed the pens, heavy boots crunching the frozen ground, murmuring judgments, too skittish, not worth the feed, might be good for dog food. Savannah flinched at their callous words. She shoved her hands deeper into her pockets, fingering the metal tin she carried, filled with every dollar she had scraped together. Birthday money, pet-sitting wages, crumpled bills from odd jobs. All she had was $120, a pitiful sum in an auction like this. But she clung to a sliver of hope all the same. Then she saw him. In the very last pen, half hidden in the shadows, stood a Mustang unlike the others. He was smaller than most, with a coat that might have once gleamed silver but now hung dull and matted over his bony frame. His ears drooped and his legs trembled slightly under his weight. One eye was clouded, not with blindness, but with a sorrow so deep it seemed almost human. A long, jagged scar ran down his right flank, a relic of some old violence. This was Ash. Ash was perhaps 5 or 6 years old, though malnutrition made him seem older. The other horses stamped or shied away as people approached, but Ash stood completely still, as if he had already given up. His breathing was shallow, and his tail barely flicked against the occasional fly. Yet when Savannah stepped closer, something flickered in his dark eye. A faint, almost imperceptible recognition. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger. It was something more fragile. Hope. Bert Landry's voice bellowed over the loudspeaker, dragging Savannah's attention back to the auction ring. One by one, horses were herded in, sold off to farmers needing cheap labor or ranchers looking for rough stock to break. The bids soared beyond Savannah's reach. $500, $700, $1,200. She shuffled closer to the auction block, casting glances back toward Ash's lonely pen, heart hammering with a mixture of desperation and dread. The minutes dragged like hours. Eleanor occasionally called out reminders, her voice tight with worry. "Savannah, remember what we talked about? Just looking, no buying." Savannah nodded dutifully each time, but her gaze never wavered from Ash. At last, Bert's gruff voice cracked the chilly air again. "Next up, lot number 35. Mustang gelding, minor injuries, poor health, skittish disposition. Starting bid, $100. A bored handler dragged Ash into the ring. The crowd shifted, murmured, and collectively recoiled. He stumbled once, almost falling to his knees before catching himself, his sides heaving with the effort. Silence followed. Bert adjusted his hat, his patience thinning. "Come on, folks. $100 for a Mustang. Anyone?" Snickers rose from a group of teenage boys leaning against the railings. A woman in a crisp riding jacket whispered to her friend, loud enough for Savannah to hear, "Not worth the oats it'll eat." Savannah's fists clenched. Her chest burned with something hotter than anger, righteous indignation, perhaps, or something close to it. Before she could stop herself, before she could think about Eleanor's warning or the practicalities of feed bills and vet visits, she raised her hand high. "I'll bid $120, she shouted, her voice cutting through the cold air like a whip crack. The crowd turned. A few laughed outright. Others just stared in disbelief at the skinny girl with the stubborn chin and the fire in her eyes. Bert squinted toward her, then shrugged. "Sold," he barked, bringing the gavel down with a definitive thud. "To the young lady with more courage than sense." Eleanor's gasp was audible even over the smattering of half-hearted applause. Ash stood blinking under the auction ring's sagging banner, the ghost of a horse waiting for a fate he could not comprehend. Savannah stepped forward, tin can clutched in both hands, her knees shaking slightly. When the handler tried to shove Ash toward her, the Mustang balked, but Savannah moved slowly, whispering low words she barely remembered learning, reaching out with an open palm rather than a rope. And something miraculous happened. Ash, battered and broken, sniffed the air around her hand, gave a weak shudder, and allowed her to take his lead rope. His body tensed as he leaned into her space but did not pull away. It was not trust, not yet, but it was a beginning. As Savannah led Ash carefully toward the holding pens, feeling the weight of dozens of incredulous stares digging into her back, the mist began to lift over Red Willow. A thin, pale sun pierced the clouds at last, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Somewhere beyond the fields, a flock of crows took flight, their black silhouettes slicing the sky. A storm might have been coming, or perhaps it was clearing. Savannah could not yet tell. But as she looked at Ash and he at her, it didn't seem to matter. They had found each other. The frost still clung stubbornly to the grass by the time Savannah and Ash arrived back at Hartley Farm. Their breath mingled in the sharp autumn air, clouds of mist swirling between the broken fence posts and the sagging barn. The property was a patchwork of faded dreams and weather-beaten structures, tucked into the outer edge of Red Willow like a forgotten postcard. Eleanor was waiting at the porch, arms crossed, her face a battleground between anger and resignation. She wore a thick brown cardigan over her jeans, her blonde hair escaping its usual tight bun, framing her face with a wariness she rarely showed in public. Eleanor Hartley was not the type to raise her voice often. She preferred her words to cut quick and deep. But seeing Savannah leading a half-dead Mustang up the driveway seemed to rob her even of that. "You bought that thing?" Eleanor said, her voice tight. She didn't move from the porch, as if putting physical distance between herself and the reality of Savannah's decision would somehow make it less real. Savannah nodded, her grip tightening on Ash's frayed lead rope. "His name is Ash," she said quietly, the kind of stubborn defiance that had once made Mason Hartley ruffle her hair with pride. For a long moment, Eleanor simply stared, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the house. Savannah exhaled shakily and led Ash toward the old barn. Inside, the barn smelled of dust, old hay, and the faint memory of better days. Mason's touch was everywhere. The hand-carved pegs for halters, the careful construction of the stalls, the faded chalk markings on the beams where he had once measured growing colts. Savannah secured Ash in the cleanest stall she could find, layering fresh straw and setting down a battered water bucket. Ash, for his part, stood unmoving, the lead rope slack in her hands. His coat, now fully visible in the barn's dim light, was a tapestry of scars and battle wounds, his silver-gray fur dulled by months, maybe years of neglect. Sinking onto an overturned bucket, Savannah rested her elbows on her knees and let her mind drift backward to a time when the barn had been alive with movement and laughter. In her memory, the world was brighter, warmer. She was 6 years old, hair braided tight against the summer heat, and Mason was showing her how to open a corral gate without spooking the horses. Mason Hartley had been a giant in her eyes, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with smile lines etched deeply around his eyes from years spent squinting against the sun. He wore old jeans that hung loose at the knees and a battered leather hat he never went anywhere without. "Listen, Vanny," he had said, using the nickname only he called her. "You can't force a Mustang to trust you. It's like standing in the river, fight it and you get swept away. Let it come to you and you find your footing." He had demonstrated, moving with slow, deliberate steps into the open field where a young, wild bay colt stood trembling. Mason never reached for the colt. Instead, he simply waited, breathing slow and deep, occasionally glancing away to show he wasn't a threat. Savannah had watched, mesmerized, as the colt eventually inched closer, ears pricked forward, drawn by the calm that radiated from her father like a second skin. "Don't grab," Mason had said, smiling as the colt nudged his hand. "Offer. Always offer." She remembered how proud she had felt when Mason let her try, how her tiny hands had trembled but held steady, how the colt had sniffed her fingers and nudged her shoulder gently, as if granting her some secret, sacred approval. That summer had felt endless. Hot days filled with riding lessons, lazy picnics under the old cottonwood by the creek, evenings spent watching the sky turn violet behind the hills. Her father had been the sun around which her small world revolved. But the seasons had turned faster than she could hold them. 2 years ago, a call had come during a late spring storm. Mason had gone out to help a neighbor whose mare had gotten trapped in a flash flood. Savannah could still hear the rain hammering against the windows, could still remember Eleanor clutching the phone, her knuckles white, the silence after she hung up heavier than thunder. Mason never came home. The accident, the paper said, was quick, but nothing about grief felt quick to Savannah. It had settled into her bones, a slow ache that no doctor could fix. Eleanor changed after that. Where once she had laughed at Savannah's dreams of becoming a Mustang trainer like her father, now she dismissed them with short, tired words. Bills piled up. The barn, once the heart of their home, became a place too painful to enter. Savannah learned to keep her dreams to herself, scribbling training plans in a battered notebook she hid under her mattress. Now, sitting in the dusty barn with a half-dead Mustang watching her with hollow eyes, Savannah felt the full weight of all those missing years pressed down on her. A sudden creak at the barn door made her jump. It was Mrs. Trudy Kavanaugh, the Hartleys' nearest neighbor. A sturdy woman in her late 50s, Trudy had a face weathered by sun and hard work, and a smile that managed to be both stern and kind at once. Today, she wore a quilted vest over a thick plaid shirt, and her gray hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. "I heard about your purchase," Trudy said, eyeing Ash with a critical gaze. "Figured you might need some oats. Brought a bag from my feed shed." Savannah rose quickly, her cheeks burning. "Thank you, Mrs. Kavanaugh." Trudy set the heavy bag down by the stall and dusted off her gloves. "He's a rough-looking one, no doubt about that, but sometimes the rough ones are the ones worth saving." Savannah swallowed hard. "I think so, too." Trudy's sharp eyes softened. "Your daddy would be proud, Vanny." She glanced once more at Ash, then added, "Just don't forget, it's not about fixing them. It's about walking with them, wounded and all." With a nod, she turned and left, her boots crunching against the gravel outside. Savannah stayed a moment longer, watching Ash nibble cautiously at the oats. His sides still heaved with every breath, but there was a flicker of something new in his posture. Curiosity, maybe even a fragile thread of trust. She reached for her notebook and scribbled the day's first entry. Ash. Day 1. Condition: malnourished. Behavior: wary but responsive to calm approach. Goal: let him come to me. No forcing, no fear. Outside, the sun dipped lower behind the hills, staining the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold. The night would come cold and fast, and there was no promise that tomorrow would be easier. But for the first time in a long time, Savannah felt something stir inside her chest, something light and fierce. Hope. The next morning dawned gray and bitter. The sky draped in heavy clouds that seemed determined to press the world flat. A sharp wind swept over Hartley Farm, rattling the broken shutters and whistling through the gaps in the barn's battered wood. Savannah Hartley woke before the sun, pulling on her oldest pair of jeans and a thick hoodie that had once belonged to her father. The fabric hung loose on her small frame, but it carried the comforting scent of hay, leather, and memories. Inside the barn, Ash stood exactly where she had left him, in the farthest corner of the stall, his back turned toward the door. His gray coat looked no better in the morning light, rough and patchy, stretched taut over ribs that jutted out like a xylophone. His mane was tangled, full of burrs and dirt, and the old scar along his flank looked angry and raw against his pale hide. Savannah set down a shallow pan of softened oats and a bucket of clean water, backing away carefully to give him space. Ash twitched an ear in her direction, but made no move toward the food. Instead, he shifted his weight uneasily, his muscles trembling under the thinness of his skin. Every movement was cautious, every glance wary, as though even breathing too loudly might shatter him. Savannah crouched outside the stall, resting her chin on her knees. She stayed there for over an hour, watching, waiting. Occasionally, she hummed softly, a lullaby her father had once sung when they rode together at dusk, but Ash showed no sign that he heard. Disappointment gnawed at her gut, but she refused to let it show. This was not going to be easy. Mason's old lessons came back to her in fragments. Patience is a river, not a storm. Trust is given in teaspoons, not buckets. Later that afternoon, Eleanor appeared at the barn doorway, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face, usually composed, was shadowed with concern. She wore her work scrubs under a heavy parka, her blonde hair pulled into a quick, no-nonsense ponytail. The years had etched permanent fatigue into her pale blue eyes, a reminder of too many long shifts and too many nights worrying over bills that didn't stretch far enough. "Still not eating?" Eleanor asked, her voice low. Savannah shook her head. "Not yet." "You can't save them all, Savannah," her mother said, not unkindly, but with the wariness of someone who had seen too many things broken beyond fixing. "I know," Savannah replied, though in her heart she refused to believe it. Without another word, Eleanor turned and trudged back toward the house, her boots crunching through the brittle grass. Savannah spent the remainder of the day cleaning Ash's stall, mending the broken latch with baling wire, and brushing away cobwebs from the beams. She worked slowly, methodically, allowing Ash to see every movement, hear every breath. She didn't try to touch him, didn't even try to catch his gaze. Instead, she moved around him like the tide, hoping he would eventually trust the current. That night, after a dinner of cold sandwiches eaten in strained silence with her mother, Savannah retreated to her room. She pulled out Mason's battered leather notebook from under her bed, the cover cracked and faded from years of use. The pages were filled with his tight, neat handwriting, tiny notes squeezed into the margins, sketches of horse anatomy and behavior diagrams drawn with a careful, loving hand. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, Savannah traced the familiar words with her fingertip. "The wild ones are not broken. They are waiting to see if you are worth their trust." Her throat tightened. She flipped to a page she had nearly memorized. "Building first contact and reread Mason's advice. Sit where they can see you. Make no sudden movements. Speak only in low, even tones. Above all, offer respect before asking for trust." It was after midnight before she finally closed the notebook and pulled her quilt over her shoulders. The wind howled against the windows, and Savannah dreamt of rivers she couldn't cross and wild horses that disappeared into mist whenever she called out. The days that followed settled into a grueling rhythm. Every morning before school, Savannah set out fresh hay, oats, and water. Every afternoon after homework, she sat quietly by Ash's stall, reading aloud from old novels, her voice steady but soft. She pretended not to notice when Ash shifted a few steps closer during the boring parts, or flicked an ear when she laughed at a funny passage. Some evenings, Mrs. Trudy Kavanaugh would stop by with a fresh bundle of carrots or a bag of second-hand horse brushes. Savannah looked forward to her visits, though Trudy often stayed only long enough to hand over supplies and murmur, "Keep at it, honey." By the third day, Ash had taken a tentative sip from the water bucket when he thought she wasn't looking. By the fifth, she found the oats pan scraped clean in the morning. Progress came not in leaps, but in fragile, fleeting moments, a shift of weight toward her instead of away, a soft snort when she entered the barn instead of dead silence. Still, there were moments of crushing disappointment. Twice, Ash bolted to the farthest corner when she entered too quickly. Once, after dropping a feed bucket by accident, he thrashed so violently he bloodied his shoulder against the stall wall. Savannah had cried quietly into her pillow that night, guilt and helplessness tangling in her chest like thorns. But each morning she got up and tried again. Late one Saturday afternoon, as the low sun burned orange against the horizon, a pickup truck rumbled down the driveway, kicking up a trail of dust. A tall man in a tan sheriff's uniform climbed out, his hat tucked under his arm. His name was Deputy Carson McKee, a kind-eyed man in his early 40s, known in Red Willow for having a gentle touch with both strays and stray humans. Carson stood about 6 feet tall with an easygoing demeanor that made people feel safe without him having to say much. His brown hair was flecked with early gray at the temples, and a perpetual smile softened the sternness of his square jaw. Rumor had it he had once dreamed of being a horse trainer himself, before an old rodeo injury left him with a slight limp in his left leg. "Afternoon, Miss Hartley," Carson called, tipping his hat toward Savannah. "Heard you got yourself a project." Savannah smiled shyly. "Something like that." Carson leaned against the fence, studying Ash with a knowing eye. "Looks rough," he said after a moment, "but not beyond saving. Just takes time, and someone too stubborn to give up." Savannah flushed with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "Your dad taught me a thing or two back in the day," Carson added, his voice growing softer. "If you're half as patient as Mason was, that horse has got a fighting chance." Before he left, he handed Savannah a small dog-eared paperback. "Calm Hands, Understanding Equine Trauma," the title read. "Found it cleaning out the old station library. Figured you might put it to better use than we ever did," he said with a wink. Savannah clutched the book to her chest as Carson's truck rumbled away into the gathering twilight. That night, she read the new book by flashlight, her heart brimming with a quiet, stubborn hope. She didn't know exactly how long it would take. She didn't know if Ash would ever fully trust her. But she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to quit. The morning winds of Red Willow carried a bite sharper than usual, threading through the weathered planks of Hartley Farm's barn like an old ghost searching for forgotten warmth. The clouds overhead hung heavy and low, smearing the horizon into smudges of gray and muted gold. Savannah Hartley pulled her hood tighter over her head and trudged through the brittle grass. A battered tin pail of oats swinging in one hand and her father's old leather notebook tucked under her arm. Ash was waiting, or rather existing, in his stall. The silver-gray Mustang, so hauntingly still in his corner, remained a portrait of resignation. His body was painfully thin, his coat unbrushed, save for what Savannah could gently clean without spooking him. His dark eyes flickered toward her whenever she entered, not with recognition exactly, but with a faint, questioning awareness. Setting the oats down, Savannah sat cross-legged a few feet outside his stall. From her pocket, she pulled a small silver whistle Mason had once given her, the kind used by trainers to signal gentle commands. It was simple, unadorned, tarnished at the edges, a relic of a better time. Savannah glanced at the pages she had bookmarked last night. Mason's handwriting was clear and steady. For highly sensitive Mustangs, repetitive low sounds, especially musical, can simulate herd reassurance. 3-note patterns work best. Do not force proximity. Let them come to you when ready. She inhaled deeply and brought the whistle to her lips. 3 low, drawn-out notes, soft and steady. Foo, foo, foo. Ash's ears twitched at the sound, a minute movement, but it filled Savannah's chest with cautious hope. She kept her posture relaxed, her hands resting on her thighs, eyes half lowered to avoid staring too intently. She blew again. Foop, foop, foop. Ash shifted a single hoof, a barely there step toward her, then froze. Savannah smiled faintly and said nothing, simply repeating the pattern every few minutes, giving the Mustang time to process the strange, gentle music weaving through the stale barn air. The next 5 days blurred into a rhythm. Each morning and afternoon, Savannah sat by the stall, whistling the same slow notes, always patient, always steady. She left the pail of oats near the center of the stall, but never crossed the invisible line Ash had drawn around himself. Mrs. Trudy Kavanaugh continued her silent support, dropping by with supplies or an extra blanket for the cold nights. Once she brought a thermos of hot cocoa and sat quietly with Savannah for an hour, saying nothing but offering the kind of comfort that needed no words. Meanwhile, Eleanor watched from a distance. She never stepped into the barn, but Savannah sometimes caught glimpses of her standing at the kitchen window, arms wrapped around herself, face tight with unspoken worry. It was on the 6th morning, gray, cold, with a light drizzle hanging like mist over the fields, that something shifted. Savannah sat as usual, her whistle silent for the moment, reading aloud from a battered copy of The Wind in the Willows. She chose the book not for any strategic reason, but because her father had loved the way the characters rambled about in search of home. Her voice was steady, if a little hoarse from the cold, and she was halfway through a passage about riverbank adventures when she noticed it, a soft scuff of hooves on straw. Savannah didn't lift her head. She kept reading, heart hammering against her ribs. In her peripheral vision, she saw Ash inching forward, one cautious step, then another, his head low, his body trembling with uncertainty. She paused, barely daring to breathe. Slowly, she set the book down beside her and reached into her pocket, pulling out a small handful of oats. She laid her open palm on the straw in front of her, fingers stretched wide, making no sudden moves. Ash's nostrils flared as he caught the scent. For a long, aching moment, he hesitated. Then, with a halting, almost painful movement, he stretched his neck forward and brushed his muzzle against her hand. The contact was feather-light, the barest whisper of touch. But to Savannah, it felt like a bolt of electricity surging through the barn. Ash lipped at the oats, his breath warm against her skin. Savannah remained frozen, afraid that even a blink might shatter the fragile spell between them. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely, unwilling to let her emotions bleed into the delicate moment. Ash ate, not greedily, but with small, tentative bites. When the oats were gone, he backed away a single step, his body still tense, but his eyes, those dark, haunted eyes, held something new. Not fear, not resignation. Later that afternoon, Savannah sat on the porch steps, Ash's halter rope coiled loosely beside her, the barn door left half open to the chilly wind. She scribbled furiously in her notebook. Day 6, first contact. Behavior, approached voluntarily, ate from hand. Emotional state, tentative but willing. Next steps, increase exposure to gentle touch. Continue musical pattern. As she wrote, the crunch of tires on gravel made her glance up. A faded green Jeep rolled into the driveway, its sides splattered with old mud. Behind the wheel was Dr. Loretta Bennett, Red Willow's local large animal vet. Dr. Bennett was a wiry woman in her early 50s, with cropped black hair peppered with gray. She favored practical clothing, cargo pants, work boots, and flannel shirts, and carried the perpetual smell of antiseptic and barn hay wherever she went. Known for her blunt manner and soft heart, she had earned the respect of the ranchers around Red Willow, even if she scared a few with her no-nonsense attitude. She climbed out of the Jeep with a small medical bag slung over one shoulder. Her hawkish eyes landed on Savannah immediately. "Your mother asked me to check in," Dr. Bennett said, her voice low and raspy from years of shouting over unruly livestock. "Heard you brought home a basket case." Savannah stood, dusting off her jeans. "His name's Ash." Dr. Bennett raised a brow. Fitting name for something almost burned out. Together, they walked to the barn. Dr. Bennett observed Ash from a distance at first, arms crossed over her chest, her keen gaze missing nothing. She spoke in a low tone, half to herself, half to Savannah. "Weight's bad, coat's worse. Scar tissue along the flank suggests a fence injury, or barbed wire. Could have been running for days before he got caught." Savannah's throat tightened. "He's trying," she said softly. Dr. Bennett's gaze softened. Sometimes that's all that matters. She gave a nod. Keep up what you're doing. Don't rush him. Don't pity him either. Horses can smell that a mile off. Before she left, she rummaged through her bag and handed Savannah a small bottle of vitamin supplements. Mix a little into his oats once he's eating regular, she instructed. Might give him a bit of strength. Savannah clutched the bottle like a precious gift. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Dr. Bennett only grunted and disappeared into her Jeep, leaving behind the faint scent of iodine and fresh sawdust. That evening, under a sky choked with clouds, Savannah sat again outside Ash's stall, the whistle in her lap, her hands steady despite the chill that seeped into her bones. She repeated the 3 soft notes over and over, watching as Ash, slowly but surely, took tentative steps closer each time. Each note was a promise, each breath a thread woven into a fragile tapestry of trust. And Savannah knew, deep down in her marrow, that they had crossed some invisible threshold. The melody of fear was fading, the song of hope was just beginning. The skies over Red Willow were clearer than they had been in days, a brittle blue stretching overhead, while a dry, biting wind swept the yellowed grasses flat against the earth. The barn, with its aging timbers and stubborn, creaking doors, stood like a weathered sentinel watching over the farm. Inside, Savannah Hartley was knee-deep in the kind of task she usually dreaded, cleaning out the cluttered storage loft. It had been Eleanor's idea. After seeing Ash finally begin to trust Savannah, Eleanor suggested the barn be made safer, though her tone implied she doubted Ash would be around long enough to truly need it. Savannah didn't argue, partly because she didn't want to spark another tense conversation, but mostly because some stubborn, hopeful part of her believed Ash deserved a real home, not just a stall surrounded by cobwebs and forgotten tools. Dust floated in lazy beams of light as Savannah hauled down broken bridles, empty feed sacks, and cracked leather saddles. Half buried under an old horse blanket, she uncovered a battered wooden chest she didn't recognize. The brass hinges were rusted, and a faded sticker on the side read Clearwater Equine Therapy Center. The same place Ash had come from. Her heartbeat quickened. She tugged the chest open, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. Inside, neatly stacked despite years of neglect, were folders, papers, and what appeared to be laminated ID tags. Savannah sifted through them carefully, her hands trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. Near the bottom of the stack, she found a folder labeled Early Response Project, subject Ash. She sank onto an overturned feed bucket, the folder resting heavily in her lap. Slowly, she opened it. The first page was a simple profile sheet. Name Ash, breed Mustang, age approx. 5 years, intake notes, displays heightened sensitivity to cortisol spikes and irregular breathing patterns. Candidate for early seizure alert training. Savannah's eyes widened. She had heard of seizure detection dogs, of course, but she hadn't known horses could be trained for something similar. She flipped to the next few pages. Progress notes, behavior logs, training schedules. A name leapt out at her from the margins. Trainer, Mason Hartley. Her throat tightened painfully. She read on, recognizing the familiar loops of her father's handwriting in the margins, commenting on Ash's behavior. Responds best to low tones and minimal visual contact. Shows hesitation but no aggression when exposed to elevated stress hormone levels in humans. Subject demonstrates early promising ability to identify pre-seizure symptoms. Nervous pacing, auditory alert, snort, hoof stamp recorded on 2 occasions. Savannah could hardly breathe. Ash wasn't broken. He wasn't defective. He was special. Her father had seen it, had believed in Ash enough to guide him toward a purpose few horses would ever achieve. The knowledge lit a fire in her chest, burning away weeks of doubt and fear. A slip of paper, tucked into the folder's back pocket, caught her attention. It was a letter, printed formally but creased from rough handling. Due to financial constraints and reallocation of project funding, the Early Response Project will be terminated effective immediately. Subject horses deemed unsuitable for alternative programs will be auctioned or surrendered to public facilities for rehoming. The letter was dated almost 18 months ago. Savannah set the folder down and wiped her dusty hands on her jeans, her mind spinning. No wonder Ash was in such bad shape. Without continued training, surrounded by noise, uncertainty, and fear, his sensitivity, once a gift, had turned against him. No wonder he had been labeled unfit by the time he reached the auction block. He hadn't failed. The world had failed him. As Savannah sat there absorbing the enormity of what she had found, the creak of the barn door startled her. She turned to see Eleanor stepping inside, carrying a tray with 2 mugs of hot tea. Her mother's face was guarded, her usual cool professionalism showing faint cracks beneath the surface. "You've been up here for hours," Eleanor said, setting the tray down on an old workbench. She wore a thick knitted sweater the color of storm clouds, her blonde hair loose today, making her look softer, almost younger. Savannah picked up the folder, hesitating only a moment before handing it over. "I found this," she said. "Dad worked with Ash." Eleanor's brows drew together as she skimmed the documents. Her hands, always so steady when handling sick animals, trembled slightly. "I remember this," she said after a long moment. Her voice was distant, like she was talking to herself. "Mason was so excited about the project. He used to come home rambling about Ash's instincts, about how the horse could sense fear before it even showed." She shook her head slowly. "But when funding got cut, everything unraveled so fast." Savannah's heart ached as she watched her mother fight the tide of old memories. "He wanted to adopt Ash," Eleanor said softly. "I remember the night he talked about it. Said Ash was different. Said he wasn't just an animal trained to react. He was trying to protect people in a way no one had ever taught him." "Why didn't he?" Savannah asked. Eleanor's shoulders sagged. "We didn't have the money. And then, the accident happened. Everything else just slipped away." They sat in silence for a long time, the dust motes swirling between them. Finally, Eleanor reached out and squeezed Savannah's hand. "Maybe it's not too late," she said, her voice rough but sure. "Maybe you can finish what your dad started." Savannah squeezed back, her throat too tight to speak. That evening, Savannah shared the discovery with Trudy Kavanaugh over a quiet dinner in the farmhouse kitchen. Trudy, still wearing her worn brown vest and sturdy boots, listened intently, her weathered face creasing into a slow smile. "Wouldn't surprise me one bit," Trudy said. "I've seen a lot of animals in my time. Some fight, some flee, and some just know, like they've got a little extra soul packed into their bones." Savannah nodded, feeling the truth of that settle deep inside her. Before she went to bed that night, she spent an extra hour in the barn. She didn't whistle this time. She just sat, breathing slowly, whispering small reassurances into the cold air. Ash stood a few feet away, his dark eyes watching her with a focus she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not suspicion. Recognition. Savannah smiled through the tears she didn't bother hiding anymore. "You're not broken," she whispered. "You're meant for more." And somewhere deep inside, she knew he believed her. Red Willow's summer fair was the kind of event that seemed to stitch the town's frayed edges back together for a little while. The sky overhead was a perfect stretch of late summer blue, dotted only by the occasional puff of cottony cloud. The air was rich with the sense of sizzling kettle corn, fresh cut hay, and the tangy sweetness of candied apples. Strands of colorful bunting flapped between poles, and a small wooden stage hosted local musicians plucking out cheerful country tunes. Savannah Hartley walked slowly alongside Ash, her fingers brushing the lead rope looped around his halter. The Mustang's silver-gray coat had filled out somewhat over the last month, the dullness replaced by a faint but growing sheen. His scar along the flank was still visible but had softened with care and time. Ash walked with deliberate, careful steps, his ears swiveling constantly at the new sounds, but he stayed close to Savannah, his movements betraying a quiet, watchful confidence. Savannah had been nervous about bringing him here. Crowds, noise, unexpected movements. These were exactly the triggers that once sent Ash recoiling into himself. But after everything they had learned together, after the slow dance of trust that had unfolded between them, Savannah believed he was ready to take his first steps into the wider world. Nearby, Eleanor stood with her arms crossed, but a rare, proud smile playing on her lips. She wore a soft denim jacket over a floral blouse, more relaxed than Savannah had seen her in months. Trudy Kavanaugh hovered close by, wearing her signature brown vest and waving to townsfolk with the casual grace of someone who had lived here her entire life. Even Deputy Carson McKee was present, standing tall by the dunk tank, his badge glinting in the afternoon light. The fair was in full swing. Children shrieked with laughter as they dashed between booths, Teenagers showed off to one another at the ring toss and pie-eating contests, and couples wandered hand in hand through the maze of food trucks and craft tables. Ash flinched slightly when a group of kids raced past, but Savannah murmured the low three-note whistle. Foo. Foo, and the Mustang's ears flicked toward her, his tension easing. "You're doing great, boy," she whispered, giving his shoulder a gentle pat. A young woman approached them, holding the hand of a girl no older than 8. The woman, tall and slender with chestnut hair tucked into a neat braid, introduced herself as Mrs. Lila Monroe. Her daughter, Daisy, clung to her side, her small body rigid with unease. Daisy had wide hazel eyes and short curly hair tied back with a pink ribbon, but her face was pale, and she seemed overwhelmed by the noise around them. "Lila Monroe," she said warmly, offering a hand to Savannah. "Daisy's? Well, she struggles with big crowds. Sometimes it gets to be too much." Savannah nodded, understanding instantly. "Would you like to meet Ash?" Daisy hesitated, shrinking back, but Ash simply stood, his head low, his entire body language an invitation without pressure. Savannah didn't push, just waited, breathing slowly and evenly the way Mason had taught her. After a long moment, Daisy reached out a trembling hand and touched Ash's shoulder. The Mustang didn't flinch. He simply blinked, shifted his weight ever so slightly to lean into the girl's touch, and exhaled a slow, warm breath across Daisy's fingers. Lila Monroe let out a shaky breath of her own. "I haven't seen her this calm since, well, a long time." Savannah smiled and led them gently toward the quieter side of the fairgrounds, where an old oak tree cast wide, comforting shadows. It might have been a perfect afternoon, until the fireworks started. Without warning, a series of sharp cracks exploded in the air above the fairgrounds. Vibrant bursts of color painted the sky, reds, greens, silvers, but the noise was deafening, especially so close. The crowd jolted, shrieks and shouts rising in confusion. Daisy froze instantly, her small body crumpling to the ground, hands clamped over her ears, her face contorted in silent terror. "Lila!" Savannah cried, but the woman was fighting through the crowd toward them, blocked by a mass of startled fairgoers. Savannah turned toward Daisy, heart hammering. Before she could move, Ash did. The Mustang stepped forward, calm despite the chaos exploding around him. He positioned his body between Daisy and the surging, shouting crowd, shielding her with his bulk. Slowly, he lowered his head until his muzzle brushed against Daisy's shoulder. He stood like a fortress, breathing slow and steady, radiating a calmness so profound it cut through the noise like a lighthouse beam. Daisy shuddered once, then again, and then, miraculously, she turned her face into Ash's mane, clutching the coarse hair with desperate fingers. Her breathing, ragged and shallow at first, gradually slowed. The entire world seemed to hush around them. People stopped, watched. A rough-looking rancher with a wide-brimmed hat wiped at his eyes. A group of teenagers, mid-laugh, fell silent. Mrs. Trudy stood a few yards away, hands pressed to her mouth. Deputy Carson, moving carefully through the crowd, called out, "Give them space, clear a path." By the time Lila Monroe reached them, she was sobbing openly, but Daisy didn't let go of Ash. She stayed tucked against the Mustang's side, her small body trembling less with each passing second. "He saved her," Lila whispered, falling to her knees beside her daughter. "Phil, he saved her." Savannah swallowed the lump in her throat, blinking furiously against tears. She dropped to her knees too, laying a gentle hand on Ash's shoulder. "You're amazing," she breathed. Ash remained perfectly still, his deep eyes reflecting the setting sun's golden light. When Daisy finally loosened her grip and peered up, her cheeks wet with tears, but her breathing even, Ash lowered his head again and gave her the softest nudge of reassurance. The crowd around them broke into applause. Not the raucous clapping reserved for talent shows or fireworks, but a genuine, heartfelt ovation that rolled across the fairgrounds like a warm tide. Savannah rose, her legs shaking, and Ash followed her lead. Eleanor stepped forward, pulling Savannah into a tight, proud hug. "I knew you could do it," she whispered into Savannah's hair. "Your father would be so proud." Deputy Carson approached, clapping Savannah gently on the back. "You're gonna change lives with him, you know that?" Savannah looked down at Ash, who nudged her side affectionately. She smiled through the tears that wouldn't be stopped now. Maybe Ash hadn't just been waiting to be saved. Maybe he had been waiting to save someone too. The days following the Red Willow Summer Fair passed in a golden blur for Savannah Hartley. Wherever she went, people stopped her to ask about Ash. Children begged for glimpses of the silver Mustang, parents offered shy thanks, and old-timers who once muttered about wild stock being useless tipped their hats respectfully when they passed her at the general store. For the first time since Mason's death, Savannah felt like she was carrying forward something real, something her father would have smiled upon. Still, not everyone watched with kind eyes. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the farm, a sleek black SUV crunched up the gravel driveway. Savannah, brushing Ash in the corral, paused as a man climbed out. He was tall and impeccably dressed, his tailored gray suit a stark contrast to the dust and sweat of Hartley Farm. His hair was slicked back, silver at the temples, and a pair of polished leather shoes crunched against the gravel as he approached with a confident, almost predatory stride. "Good afternoon," he said smoothly, extending a hand. "Name's Victor Hale. I represent Hope Horizons Foundation. We specialize in promoting therapy animals for children with special needs." Savannah shook his hand hesitantly. His skin was cold, his grip firm to the point of discomfort. "That Mustang of yours, Ash is it, has generated quite the buzz," Victor continued, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his pale blue eyes. "We'd be honored to purchase him and sponsor his full certification and outreach work. We're prepared to offer," he paused dramatically, $150,000. Savannah blinked, stunned. That was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Enough to pay off the mortgage, rebuild the barn, even help Eleanor open the veterinary clinic she always dreamed of. But the idea of handing Ash over to strangers, to a foundation she had never heard of, tightened her stomach into knots. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "but Ash isn't for sale." Victor's smile thinned. "You'd be securing his future, young lady. Access to the best trainers, medical care, exposure." Savannah held her ground. "His future is here, with me." For a moment, something flickered across Victor's polished mask, something sharp and cold, but he quickly covered it, chuckling lightly. "Of course, youthful idealism, admirable." He stepped back, straightening his cufflinks. "If you change your mind," he added, pulling a heavy business card from his coat pocket, "our offer stands." Savannah watched him drive away, a trail of dust curling behind his SUV like smoke. That night, she tucked the card into her father's old notebook and tried to shake the unease that clung to her. 2 nights later, the smell of smoke woke her. It started faintly, a sharp tang cutting through her dreams. Then she heard it, the distant crackle of flames, the panicked whinny of horses. She bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs. She barely remembered pulling on her boots before she was running, her mother's startled shouts echoing behind her. The barn was ablaze. Orange tongues of fire licked the night sky, devouring the dry wood with terrifying speed. Embers shot into the air like angry stars. The heat hit Savannah like a wall, but through the haze of smoke and terror, she heard Ash screaming, a wild, terrified sound that tore into her heart. Without thinking, Savannah charged toward the flames. Eleanor screamed her name, but she barely heard it. The barn door sagged inward, already half consumed. Coughing, Savannah yanked a corner of her sweatshirt up over her mouth and plunged inside. The smoke was thick and choking. Beams groaned above her. She stumbled blindly toward Ash's stall, where the Mustang thrashed wildly against the walls, his gray coat darkened with soot and terror. "Easy, boy," she rasped, her voice shredded by smoke. "I'm here." Ash's eyes rolled white in the firelight. But when he saw her, really saw her, he froze for a precious second. It was all the time she needed. Savannah fumbled with the latch, her fingers slick with sweat and ash, and tore it open. "Come on," she shouted, tugging on the lead rope. For one heart-stopping moment, Ash hesitated. Then he plunged after her, hooves skidding on the scorched floor as they fled into the night air. They stumbled clear just as a section of the barn roof collapsed with a deafening roar, showering sparks into the sky. Eleanor ran to them, throwing a blanket around Savannah's shoulders. Sobbing with relief, neighbors soon arrived, along with the town's tiny fire department, but the barn was beyond saving. They managed to contain the fire before it reached the farmhouse, but by dawn, the Hartley barn was nothing more than a blackened skeleton against the sunrise. Savannah sat on the tailgate of Deputy Carson McKee's truck, a blanket draped around her shoulders, Ash standing quietly nearby as firefighters stomped through the smoldering ruins. Carson crouched beside her, his face grim. "Savannah," he said gently, "we found something." He held up a small, battered wildlife camera, the kind Trudy had given her months ago to monitor Ash at night. The camera had melted around the edges, but somehow, the memory card had survived. Within an hour, Carson had set up a laptop in the kitchen. Savannah, Eleanor, and Trudy crowded around as the grainy footage played. First, just darkness. Then headlights sweeping across the field. A figure emerged, tall, wearing a jacket with the Hope Horizons logo embroidered on the chest. He carried a gas can. Victor Hale. Savannah clamped a hand over her mouth as she watched him pour gasoline around the barn, light a match, and vanish into the night, the flames blooming behind him. Eleanor's face was carved from stone. "That man tried to kill you," she said, voice shaking with fury. Carson nodded grimly. "And destroy the evidence." He tapped the screen. "Background check says Hope Horizons isn't even a real charity. Victor Hale's real name is Victor Harlan, former biotech consultant, fired for ethics violations linked to illegal animal experiments. My guess? Ash was part of one of those projects. He found out you still had him, and panicked." Savannah stared at the screen, cold horror spreading through her. Ash, who had once been thrown away like a broken toy, had been targeted again, because someone wanted to erase the past. But he was still here. They both were. Savannah leaned into Ash's warm flank, feeling the steady thud of his heart against her cheek. "You're safe," she whispered. "No one's taking you away again." Carson clapped her gently on the back. "We'll take care of Harlan. You just take care of him." Savannah nodded, tears blurring the ruins of the barn outside the window. From the ashes, they would rise again, together. Morning light spilled over Red Willow, in hues of gold and crimson, illuminating the dew-slicked grass and casting long shadows across the newly risen beams of the Hartley Hope Center. The air was sweet, with the scent of fresh lumber and wildflowers, and in the soft breeze, the colorful banners strung across the entrance flapped gently, carrying the laughter of children and the faint strains of acoustic guitar music. Savannah Hartley stood near the main gate, her hands clenched nervously around the ribbon she was meant to cut. She wore a simple, sleeveless blue dress that fluttered at her knees, her hair braided down her back with tiny sprigs of baby's breath tucked in between. At 16, she carried herself with a grace beyond her years, shaped by the trials she had endured and the unwavering love she bore for the battered Mustang beside her. Ash stood calm and regal at her side, his silver coat gleaming in the morning sun, the faint scar along his flank, now a silent badge of survival. His dark eyes swept over the crowd without fear, only curiosity, his ears flicking occasionally at the burst of giggles or the distant bark of a dog. The Hartley Hope Center was modest but proud. 2 new barns framed a wide-open training yard, and a smaller building with wide windows and bright murals would serve as a classroom and therapy lounge. Volunteers and neighbors, once skeptical of Savannah's dream, had rallied after the fire, offering time, supplies, and sweat to rebuild what had been lost. And now, on this bright, forgiving day, the dream stood realized in sturdy wood and fresh paint. Children ran through the fields, their laughter carrying over the breeze. Small hands clutched paper kites painted with Mustangs and suns, and bright balloons bobbed like cheerful ghosts above their heads. Parents and community members lined the new wooden fences, clapping and smiling, the hardships of the past months forgotten for this single, shining moment. Deputy Carson McKee, still limping slightly from an old rodeo injury, was among the crowd. He wore his full sheriff's uniform today, complete with a polished silver star, and carried himself with a pride that wasn't just for duty, but for the small miracle he had witnessed grow from ashes. Near the refreshment stand, Mrs. Trudy Kavanaugh handed out slices of homemade peach pie, wearing her signature brown vest and a wide straw hat that shaded her lined face. She beamed with grandmotherly pride every time someone mentioned Savannah's name. Dr. Loretta Bennett, the town's tough love veterinarian, lingered close to the barns, keeping a sharp eye on Ash and the other horses being introduced today. She wore faded jeans, a red plaid shirt, and the slight smile of a woman who rarely showed emotion, but secretly relished seeing hard work pay off. At the edge of the crowd stood a boy about Savannah's age, lanky and shy, with sandy brown hair and an awkward slouch. His name was Caleb Donovan, the son of the town's baker. Caleb had always been quiet in school, the kind of boy who preferred sketching Mustangs in his notebook to playing football. Today, he clutched a leather-bound journal, nervously waiting for a chance to hand it to Savannah, a gift he had spent weeks preparing, filled with drawings and words inspired by Ash's story. As the mayor of Red Willow, a robust woman named Patricia "Patty" Munro stepped up to the small wooden platform near the barn, she tapped the microphone, her voice booming warmly over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and four-legged heroes alike," she began, smiling down at Ash. "Today we gather not just to celebrate the rebuilding of a barn, but the rebuilding of hope itself." Savannah swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. When Patty motioned for her to come forward, she walked toward the podium, with Ash pacing gently beside her. Facing the crowd, Savannah cleared her throat and gripped the edges of the podium. Her heart hammered, but when she looked down at Ash, standing so patiently, so trustingly, the words came. "My dad once told me," she said, her voice steady, "that the most precious things in life are often the ones other people overlook." She paused, letting the quiet wind carry her father's memory through the sun-drenched air. "When Ash first came into my life, he was hurt, scared, and forgotten. People said he wasn't worth saving, but he was. He is. Every life is." A hush fell across the fields. "This center isn't just about horses," Savannah continued, glancing at the children playing with colorful therapy balls and obstacle courses in the yard. "It's about second chances. For all of us." The applause that rose up was not deafening but warm, surrounding her like a soft blanket. With a smile trembling on her lips, Savannah took the ceremonial scissors handed to her by Patty Munro. She cut the ribbon, and the Hartley Hope Center officially opened. Later, after the speeches and the games and the endless cups of lemonade, Savannah wandered away from the crowd with Ash trailing faithfully behind her. She made her way to the old maple tree near the edge of the property, the one Mason Hartley had planted when Savannah was born. Its leaves were beginning to turn, fiery reds and burnt oranges dancing in the soft afternoon light. She leaned against the broad, sturdy trunk, letting her fingers trail across the rough bark. Ash stood quietly nearby, his muzzle brushing the low branches as if paying his own kind of respect. Savannah closed her eyes and tilted her face to the sky. She could almost hear her father's voice in the rustling leaves. "You were right, Dad," she whispered. "The most precious things are the ones everyone else throws away." Opening her eyes, she looked across the golden fields where children laughed without fear, where parents smiled with cautious hope, where a silver Mustang once destined for oblivion now walked with quiet pride. A new day had come to Red Willow, and it had brought with it not just healing, but the promise of 1,000 new beginnings. In the quiet fields of Red Willow, Savannah and Ash taught us a simple truth. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not found in thunder or spectacle, but in the steady hands that heal, in the quiet hearts that believe, and in the overlooked souls that refuse to give up. It reminds us that God often plants his miracles where the world least expects them. In broken horses, in grieving daughters, in small towns and battered barns. Maybe you are waiting for a miracle right now. Maybe you feel forgotten, overlooked, or worn thin by life. But just like Ash found his purpose through love and patience, just like Savannah found her strength through faith and perseverance, you too are never abandoned. God sees you. He is working through the quiet places of your life, even when you cannot see it yet. If this story touched something in your heart today, we invite you to share it with someone who needs a little hope. Leave a comment below and let us know what part of the journey spoke to you most. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you can walk with us through more stories of faith and redemption. And if you believe in the power of second chances and miracles, type Amen in the comments to join us in a prayer for blessings over you and your loved ones. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and remind you daily that his greatest works often begin with the smallest seeds of hope. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.